This is Pamela Smythe from the University of Waterloo. I'm one of the hosts of Beyond the Bulletin, the podcast of internal communications at the university. We bring you news and views from the U-Waterloo community. Please spread the word that we're on soundcloud.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And now the interview from episode 74 of Beyond the Bulletin, originally broadcast on January 22nd, 2021. When Pearl Sullivan died on November 28, 2020, feelings of loss spread throughout the university community and beyond. The Dean Emeritus of the Faculty of Engineering made an immeasurable impact on her colleagues, students, and others who met her. We wanted to hear from two people close to Pearl Sullivan for a look at the lasting effect she had. We connected with Mary Wells and Jay Shah. Professor Wells is Dean of Waterloo Engineering, and she taught in the Department of Mechanical and Mechatronics Engineering when Sullivan was chair. Jay Shah knew her as an engineering student and a budding and then successful entrepreneur, plus as a colleague when he led Velocity, Waterloo's largest entrepreneurship program. Mary Wells and Jay Shah, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
Thanks for having me.
So, Mary, let's start with you. What do you think Pearl's main contributions to engineering education at Waterloo are?
Well, that's so hard to kind of capture in just a few sentences. She just had such a major impact and was such a tiny person in terms of her stature, but such a giant in terms of her presence and her impact. And, you know, when she first became Dean of Engineering, she started the Educating the Engineer of the Future Fund. And her goal was really towards enhancing the experience the students had. One of the very tangible physical legacies of that is Engineering 7 or E7, which is a new building, which is a beautiful building. And that is really an exceptional outcome because when she started that campaign, there was no funds available for E7. And typically these things could take decades, but she managed to do it in a very short period of time. And part of it was her passion for engineering education, her ability to articulate that and let others share in that idea and that dream that she had.
So Engineering 7, the home of the RoboHub and the Ideas Clinic, could you tell us a bit more about what those are and what the impact is likely to be?
So when we think about Engineering 7 or E7, I do actually believe that was one of her proudest moments was when that building opened. And, you know, in addition to the lecture halls, the study areas, and those kind of special spaces for students to be able to do project work and stuff, Engineering 7 also included this 2-floor Engineering Ideas Clinic. And it was really an opportunity for students to come together to do hands-on design challenges and activities to help teach theoretical concepts in a more hands-on way. And it led to being led by Sanjeev Bedi as our NSERC chair for design to design days for the first years. And it was a way for students to come together to work in collaboration on designs, challenges that were teaching you engineering, but also incredibly fun. And there are some absolutely wonderful photos of Pearl engaging in those design days with the students. And, you know, the joy on her face to see the students, what they've been able to accomplish in a very short period of time through those design days. So that's been really good. You've also alluded to the fact that there were some other really significant aspects of E7, including the RoboHub. And this was really around a physical presence and the facilities and infrastructure needed to enhance Waterloo's reputation as one of the top places where things like artificial intelligence and robotics occur. And it's an absolutely outstanding facility and, you know, is leading today to some of the research activities we have in this area. We've just hired a Canada Excellence Research Chair, Katya Mombar, who does look at robotics and the interaction between humans and robotics, and the whole area of healthcare and robotics and things. So again, she planted the seeds for those things to occur, and those will be realized over the next decade in terms of what we're able to do and the impact we will have on the world by some of that new knowledge that is generated.
What do you think, Jay?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, right? And you look at like those seeds kind of blossoming. You know, something like Hack the North, for example, right? Like that's not something the building was designed for, but you look at the impact that has because you have a facility and support to go beyond just the classroom activities. And all of a sudden we're engaging thousands of people across the country in really rich STEM activities and inspiration. that's the ripple that adds up so much and creates this wave of change.
So the ideas clinic, as you were saying, Mary, it gives students an opportunity to take what they're learning in the classroom and actually do it
Yes.
to enhance their learning. Was that something that Pearl was instrumental in getting into E7?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it was one of the pieces of E7. Again, this focus on the student experience. And so they have a beautiful physical space now where they can come together to, dissect an engine, dissect a coffee maker, and put it back together and understand how things work, and really enhance that curiosity that people have about, why things work the way they do. And so it's about exploration, it's about discovery, it's about having fun, and to have a space to be able to do that with each other.
And from a student perspective, like that's what puts the applied into the applied science, right? Like it really makes it feel tangible when you go from, here are the crazy models of a system to here's the actual system now. Like touch it, play with it, feel it, understand the parameters of it. Like to me, when I think back of what made it engineering applicable for me, like how can I actually use the theories, it was all based on those tangible hands-on activities, right? So the more that we do, I think the better our students and our engineers will be, right?
Jay, did you have Pearl as a professor?
So as a professor in a academic sense, no, but she was our department chair at the time. And so I had lots of interactions with her through student council, through being my class rep, lots of discussions around, we were going through an accreditation review at the time. And so there was all sorts of back and forth that she was kind of leading and helping us be involved in. So lots of exposure, but never had to write one of her exams.
As a student, what were your interactions with her like?
I don't know. They were always like precise, direct, super clear, because I think that's who she was, in the most refreshing way, right? So we got in, we did what we needed to do. Peripheral conversation was, brought in if it mattered, and then stopped if it wasn't. And it really meant that we could get a lot done every time. So it was almost like if we were going to have a meeting and Pro wasn't there, then we wouldn't want to have it.
Oh, really? I get the sense that she didn't distinguish between students, faculty, admin. Like there was no hierarchy with her.
She had a tremendous amount of respect for everybody, right? Like, I don't know. I think I was a second year student at the time, and I never felt like there was this huge divide between talking to the chair of my department and then later, the dean of engineering. Like she was approachable because she respected everybody, I think, in a large part.
Mary, what was your experience with Pearl like as a colleague? Then she was your boss and your predecessor. What was that like?
Well, it's interesting. Pearl's and my history has sort of followed each other. So, for example, we both studied metallurgical engineering. I studied it at McGill. She studied it at Dalhousie or Tons. She then went to UBC to do a PhD in materials. She just finished that. 2 years later, I went to do a PhD at UBC. That was the first time I heard about Pearl, was when I went to UBC. And I was doing my PhD in materials engineering. And other people said, "Oh, have you met Pearl Sullivan?" And I said, "No," but I started hearing about her. 10 years later, when I had finished my PhD, I'd become an academic at UBC. I'd then get a phone call from her after I'd done an interview at Waterloo asking me if I'd like to join the Department of Mechanical and Mechatronics Engineering because they'd been looking for someone in materials and manufacturing. And so that was really my first interaction with her, was as a chair recruiting me. And I must say, it really was my first experience with a female leader in engineering. And so I took the position. Nobody could ever say no to Pearl. And I came with my husband and 3 small children in tow to make the move from Vancouver to Waterloo. And a week before I was starting, I went in to just set out my office. I had my youngest daughter, Michelle, who was probably just a year and a half at the time. I didn't normally take my children into UBC, but because I didn't have any childcare yet, I took her in. And Pearl heard Michelle and said, "Is there a baby around?" And right away came out and said, "Oh my goodness, it's so wonderful to see a baby in the department." And I was just, wow, what a welcoming presence. She also helped me find a house. Like she went beyond what was typically needed. And she also helped me find a family doctor, which in those days in Waterloo, there was a huge shortage, and she knew I had 3 small children, and that was something I was worried about. So she really took care of me as an entire person, not just kind of making sure my research lab was ready, but that the other parts of my life. she really stood out to me as a different kind of leader than I'd been used to in the past. So that was those were my first experiences with Pearl, and I was so impressed with her. And she taught me, I think, when I came to Waterloo, how important our students were and that they are the heart of the university. And that really has resonated with me. And that you should be taking the time to get to know them, who they are, what their own hopes and dreams are. And I always say she led with her whole heart. And that's what a leader should do.
Do you think that's what made her an exceptional leader, or were there a variety of things?
I think that was part of it. It was her leading with her whole heart, her humility, her respect for everybody, her willingness to listen more than speak. And in terms of the accomplishments, she said, I think it was her laser focus on a few key areas that really led to exceptional outcomes.
Jay, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I just want to say, since you can't see me, like I've been aggressively nodding this entire time, and I find that interesting because it's coming from a very different perspective of the student side of things, and so like everything Mary has said is so spot on, but the fact that Pearl was able to do that across such a wide spectrum of scope, right? Like your recruitment of new people, faculty, students, new infrastructure projects. That's a lot to take on with your whole heart all the time and do really well.
Well, you know her, Jay, not just as a student and as a student leader, but also as an entrepreneur, because you're a founder of BufferBox, which was a startup that developed automated self-serve kiosks for parcel delivery so that students wouldn't keep missing their packages being delivered to the university. It was acquired by Google in 2012. So what was your interaction with her like around that time?
Thematically, very similar to what we've been talking about, just full of support, going over and above. At this point, we were transitioning from effectively graduated engineers, still kind of hanging on to university for dear life while we figured out what we were doing next, into this entrepreneurial world. And I remember she'd invited us to come present to Dean's Council to share this wild aspiration that we had to start this company about these asynchronous kiosks. Like she didn't need to do that and expose us to industry leaders and get feedback from them. We were still using the machine shop at the time. Our watt card said that we still had the date that was okay, and she knew that and was totally happy about it. And I think it's those types of things that maybe are defined in a principle of I want to enable maximum potential, and there's lots of wiggle room in the framework that we work in. So like, yes, you're graduated and you already have your degree and you probably shouldn't be hanging around here anymore, but you're not doing any harm. And that in an institution, in any large institution, is really hard, right? Like as things scale up, you fall back on rules and guidelines and black and white kind of policies. And I don't think I ever saw Pearl do that, right? It was always coming back to what's the best thing to do for our students? What's the best thing to do for our alumni? And then almost like a first principles derivation of therefore we should do X. And not in a reckless way at all, which is what everybody should do, right? Like, let's look at the intent behind what could cause good outcomes and then do that thing.
Right. Mary, you are the Dean of Engineering at Waterloo now.
Yes, I am.
Did Pearl have any advice for you? Was she one for advice?
Well, a little bit. I mean, I really think, she was a colleague. She was a mentor to me, absolutely. But most of all, she was my friend. And I miss her so much. But she, when I got the opportunity to be the dean at Guelph, I approached her and I talked to her about it. And, she was quite disappointed that I was leaving Waterloo. But she put that aside and she said, it's a good opportunity for you. You should take it. And so she did give me significant advice about not only how to approach being a dean, but the, what a dean means to the faculty. In Guelph, it's called colleges and things. So I definitely learned so much from her in terms of who she was as a leader. Then when she decided to step down at Waterloo, she did say to me, she goes, I'm stepping down. You may want to think about coming back to Waterloo. So she did kind of nudge me a little bit in that way. And she just said, I think you'd be great for Waterloo and it would be great to have you back. And that's really all she said. So she really only gave advice when she was asked. She didn't kind of give you unwanted advice and things. So, but I just want to go back to what Jay was saying about the entrepreneurship. And I think that was another one of her legacies is she was such a strong proponent of entrepreneurship and our students and making those connections. And again, letting them realize their full human potential. And I think she saw those kinds of opportunities maybe before other people did. And now it's very kind of commonplace that everybody's into entrepreneurship. But I think she was one of the kind of early adopters for those opportunities. And that's why Waterloo continues to be a leader in, engineering and entrepreneurship and things like that. I think she is a large reason behind that.
You were the head of Women in Engineering, the Ontario Women in Engineering.
Yeah.
What kind of support did you get from Pearl to increase the proportion of female engineers?
Pearl was always a very strong voice for and supporter of diversifying the engineering field and recruiting more women into the field. And she really was such a strong voice and supporter for getting more young women to consider engineering as a career choice for them and the value that they would bring to the profession. So anytime I was running any events, Pearl always was so pleased to come and speak to the young women about being an engineer and the joy she had derived from her own career as an engineer. So she really was a role model. I think she was the fourth or fifth dean of engineering that was a woman across the country. So she was really a significant mentor and role model for many of us.
What do you think about that, Jay? Did it matter that your chair was a female engineer?
As a moldable young student coming into a faculty, to see that type of representation of diversity, whether it's gender or otherwise, in the leaders of your institution, automatically changes the framing of what you expect everywhere else. I think it's important to have the model of what we want the world to look like in a place like a university where people are learning what the world should be or what they want, right?
Right. I've read, Jay, in articles following Pearl's death in the fall, you said she was an inspiration. What did you mean by that?
Across the different types of relationships I had or exposure that I had with her, there was always something I took away from it that made me maybe better, right? Like that made me either aim higher, made me introspect and resolve things that would hold me back, that might not allow me to achieve my maximum outcome. And I think, more recently, kind of in the Velocity role where my interactions with her were more at an institutional level, she was always a bright light to remind me that, like, the university is a complicated place. Things can get buried and messy and slow and all this stuff, but it doesn't have to be that way, right? There is a way that you can deploy your strong convictions and accomplish great things. There is a way that scale, like as you grow something larger and larger, it doesn't have to get diluted. It doesn't have to be ruined just because it's big. And it takes lots of attention and lots of time and lots of dedication, which is what she showed, right? Like she showed that, yes, we can assemble a committee of 30 people to talk about a really complex thing and still have a useful outcome. And that's rare.
Now, I should add, Jay, you were director of Velocity. And that was when Pearl was the dean of engineering. And there are a number of engineering companies at Velocity. And so your relationship changed.
I think it did in the sense that I saw more of, let's call it university management, right? Like before I was simply in the faculty of engineering, right? And then looking at it, having to look at it from a different perspective, because Velocity is faculty agnostic, and trying to understand these nuances of, wow, like she's got to deal with a lot of challenges around the existence of faculties within a larger structure, that there's changing motivations and budget constraints and all sorts of things, right? And again, going back to the inspiring part is that I don't, and this was advice I think she gave me in pretty literal terms, was like, your motivations and your own incentives don't matter. Like you should focus on doing what's right. So like, even if you ask yourself, like, what is my motivation and intent in this moment personally, park that, because it's irrelevant to the outcome of what you're trying to do if you're trying to achieve the greater good, and then go and focus on that. And she did that time and time again. And I got to witness that in a structure that's very complicated, like a university with many faculties.
And you've described her as a mentor.
She would encourage me to speak my mind, ask questions, focus, like that laser focus, right? Always coming back to what is the most important thing. And for her, that was students. And I yes, like the university, everybody should kind of hold that type of principle really close to their heart, because it will make them better at what they do, right? And so I think those were the things I took away from that mentorship.
Now, Mary, you had said that Pearl helped you find a house. Is this when you became neighbors?
We did. Well, she found me a real estate agent. We ended up living in the same neighborhood as she was, so that was another kind of added benefit. I would see her as a neighbor as well. So
No loud parties, I hope.
no, no, no loud parties. So and in fact, again, this just speaks to who Pearl is. I remember on some nights she loved going into Toronto to get some Asian food that at the time wasn't available in Waterloo. So she would always pop in my house and drop me off a few goodies afterwards. So just unannounced, just as a very generous act to try some things out she thought I might enjoy. So
How kind. That's a nice story. I'd like to share a personal story. So I think it was a couple of years ago when the Globe and Mail did a special photo feature for International Women's Day. And Donna Strickland was featured and Pearl was featured. Pearl showed up for her photo and the photographer said, "So do you want to listen to any music?" And she said, "I'm going to play you the best rock music, my favorite band ever." And I thought, I have got to hear this. And it was ELO. And I remember when they played in Toronto, I sent her an email, which is unusual. I'm sending a dean of engineering an email saying, "Hey, did you go to the concert?" She said, "Oh, I just loved it. It was so great." I think that speaks a lot to what she is like. You could talk to her about complicated engineering things, which I couldn't even get into, or, her favorite music.
yeah, I knew she liked Coldplay also. She told me Chris Martin, so we would talk about that a little bit as well. So she had a few favorite groups.
Oh, really? Let's talk about some favorite personal memories that we have of Pearl. I mean, we've talked a little bit about them already. Are there any others you wanted to add?
Well, I know that for myself, I did travel with her to California. And again, food was such an important thing for her. So she took me to one of her favorite restaurants to eat. And just having a meal together. She loved that, sharing that time with people, discussing things, enjoying some good food. So one of my memories of her is she really enjoyed food, and she enjoyed eating food and sharing it with the people around her. And the other thing is, when we traveled together, I would often have to drive her into Toronto. I was her chauffeur, and she was constantly on her BlackBerry, working endlessly while we were driving. But besides that, she always asked me how my family was doing, how the children are doing in school, and things like that. So she always focused on you as the whole person. I think it speaks to, again, leading with her whole heart, and to always be focused on the people. And they are the heart of the institution, and that's where your focus should always be.
So it's interesting to hear the stories about her love for music, because my favorite memory was we had this event. It was like an anniversary celebration at Velocity. It was an evening event. It was very much designed for kind of the younger audience that Velocity generally interacts with. And of course, Pro was invited. She's been a huge part of that, the success and the entrepreneurial support. And I'm thinking this was probably like 8 or 9 p.m. at night that she comes in. And we've got music blaring and, like dance lights going on. This is inside the incubator because we kind of turned it into the celebratory environment. And she's just dancing away, like having a grand old time, like just loving life. That was her spirit, right? Just willing to be genuine, authentic, have a good time. There's no reason for her to obfuscate any of that. You knew who she was because she brought her whole self there.
Well, I think, at her funeral, somebody referred to her as an iron butterfly. And I just think it's a really fitting way to describe her, both, in terms of her strength, perseverance, and focus, juxtaposed against, a sense of beauty, inner beauty, and whimsy also. One day, laser focused, the dean of the largest engineering program in Canada, really achieving exceptional outcomes. And then, bopping away to some music and enjoying K-pop and dancing and things like this. And I think it really speaks to who she was as a person. And she was just so exceptional. We will always remember her and always miss her. That's for sure.
Jay, what else would you like to add?
Just that the imprint she's left on my mind of what it looks like to be an exceptional leader, like just truly stand out in every way. Because it's something that drives me. I think it's something that lots of other people have witnessed and drives them to achieve similar levels of just sheer potency and amazingness. and that has a long ripple effect. Like, there'll be so many great things that result from that.
So Pearl stepped down as dean in 2019. She continued to work at the university on special projects for engineering, national, international projects. What can you tell us about those?
Sure. Well, I mean, even last February, on February 14th, in fact, Pearl opened a new physical asset we have, which is called the Vehicle Research and Intelligence Lab, or AVRIL. And this is a research facility for autonomous vehicles. And it'll focus on areas such as perception by self driving vehicles in all weather conditions. Thinking about Canada, can our sensors accurately kind of detect the vehicles around them and the conditions, even in snowy conditions or an ice condition and things like that? So they're doing some really interesting work around that and looking at how they interact and interface with other vehicles, and also safety issues and things like that. So she continued to be very involved, and I'll never forget. In fact, we had one student, I think he's a third year mechatronics student, Sam Duggan, who was just on Dragon's Den in October. His pitch ended up getting funded, and he told me that she had reached out to him to tell him how proud we were of him and to congratulate him.
And she was very ill then.
Oh yeah, yeah. That was about a month before she passed on. So yeah, so she even up until the very end, she was still doing everything she could to help advance students, to help congratulate students, to kind of encourage them to continue to strive towards being the best that they could be.
Wow, what a tremendous professional and personal legacy Pearl leaves. Thank you, Mary Wells and Jay Shah. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Pamela. It was lovely speaking about Pearl.
Likewise. Thanks for having us.
Thank you for listening to this interview from the Beyond the Bulletin podcast from the University of Waterloo. You will find our archive of full episodes on the University of Waterloo website, and select interviews are on the university's YouTube channel. Just look for our playlist there. Please join Brandon Sweet and me for new episodes on Fridays, and don't forget to tell your Waterloo connections about us.